Conversation, that's an old English word, not for your things you're talking, but how you're walking. Let your conversation be as it becometh the gospel of Christ, that whether I come see you or else be absent, I may hear of your affairs, that you stand fast in one spirit with one mind, striving together for the faith of the gospel. There it is. These phrases that Paul uses here, the fellowship of the gospel, in the gospel, the furtherance of the gospel, the defense of the gospel. And now he, in the end of chapter 1, is talking about the faith of the gospel. And a lot of Christians, because they don't have faith in the power of the gospel, they're timid to declare the gospel or share the gospel. But the gospel is mighty to save. It is the power of God. The gospel, it is the power of God to save people. It's not your power. It's not your preaching. It's not my preaching. The Bible kind of laughingly calls preaching the foolishness of preaching. But Paul says the Lord uses the foolishness of preaching, but that's not where the power is. The power is in the gospel that's being preached. That's where the real power is. And so what Paul is saying, that we need to have faith in the power of the gospel. It works. It's powerful. And we see that. Like some of the last people in the world I would have ever imagined would accept Jesus Christ. Think about that in your mind right now. Of all your friends or family members or acquaintances, who's the least likely person to be saved? And do you understand that the gospel is powerful enough to reach that person? Because I've had people in my life that I would have put them on that list. Some of you were that person. Some of you sitting here in this sanctuary right now as Christians, you say, no, I was that person, that guy, that girl. I remember learning about this when I was a kid. My dad, from time to time, after dinner, me and my sisters would eat dinner, and then he'd pull out a book and start reading stories and stuff. Well, one of those stories he read to us when I was a little kid was the story of the cross and the switchblade. And it was about a country bumpkin preacher who stumbles into New York because there's these horrible gangs. Back in the 60s and 70s, there was these gangs that were murderous gangs. And one was the Mau Maus. And the president of the Mau Maus was a guy named Nicky Cruz. And it's this crazy story where this preacher goes in and just shares the gospel. And it's this great story of how the gospel changed this president of the Mau Maus. He was the worst of the worst. And then he becomes a Christian. Then he turns to all the gang members and says, you're all going to become Christians too. And they're like, okay, yes, sir. Like it's a great story that all these people got saved because the gospel was powerful, even to the hardest of hearts. And I've seen that. There's people that I would have never thought would come around to accept Jesus. Don't be afraid to let the gospel do its thing. Paul was one of those guys. He was the last guy you'd think to be saved. Paul was a Pharisee of all Pharisees, and he was murdering Christians and imprisoning them. Paul says in 1 Timothy chapter 1, verse 15, he says, this is a faithful saying and worthy of all acceptation that I, Paul the apostle, that I was the chiefest of sinners who Jesus Christ came to save. Paul says, I was the worst of the worst, and Jesus Christ came to save me. I love Hebrews chapter 7 because some of you guys were in the uttermost parts and the furthest away from God. And I'm reminded of Hebrews 7:25 that says, wherefore he is able also to save them to the uttermost that come to God by him.